You're absolutely right. And, that's
Um,
something that Perk has been very concerned about is these secondary impacts that are really direct impacts from the overreach and the shutdown. And as people of color are already disproportionately impacted just in pretty much with everything happening here. And then you push people further into poverty, which actually makes that an issue where people die from poverty. You know, and that's a huge problem of in that
well, that's right. I've done some research on this. Well, first of all, they're not suffering more because they're of color, in my opinion. They're suffering more because they're in the lower economic classes. They're underprivileged. They
mm-hmm.
have less power, less influence. It's not related to the pigmentation of their skin. They're going to be trampled because they're in that strata of society that we can trample because they have less influence. They're not the professional class.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but I just wanted to make that point so that it doesn't become about a racism justice
Right.
intervention.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, the other thing that's important to say is, the government might say, but we can afford it. The United States prints as much money as it wants. It bails out the banks. It does all these things whenever it wants. And we can have food banks and we could have food lineup. We can still feed you,
Oh, right.
right? They can say that. But what that ignores is that you have damaged the health of people, even though
Right.
you're feeding them. Even if you give them what they need in terms of their bodies, the fact that they lose their independence, their economic independence, their
Yes.
dignity, their ability to work in society and to get what they need through their own actions, as opposed to becoming someone who is dependent on the state,
Yes.
that has a huge impact on your individual health.
You're
If you see
absolutely
yourself as a dependent person and
right.
as a victim of that, and as having no influence in society, your immune system is actually going to be is lowered by that. And there's a lot of studies that demonstrate that. So if you take people who are in small business owners and small business workers and work for small businesses and have all these jobs and are having this very dynamic life within the economy,
Mm-hmm.
and you take all that away from them, even just for many months, or maybe it'll be a year, I don't know, and you force them into getting paid help from society, that can create some real damage.
You're
So
absolutely.
yeah, I needed to say those things.
No, I appreciate that. And I think the problem here in California as well is that, the government is choosing what's essential and what's not essential. And there's a lot of, there's tons of business owners who are losing their business. Their doors are closed. They don't have revenue. And people are stigmatizing these business owners for wanting to go back to work and wanting to open their business because this is how they're providing for their family. So somehow there's this huge disconnect happening on that's all of a sudden bad or wrong
Yeah.
or not okay for business owners to do that. And there are over 3 million people in California that have applied for unemployment benefits, and that's just an indication. It's an indicator of how deeply impacted Californians are in the
Yes.
economy and their
I,
jobs and businesses.
I think this lockdown has been a grotesque abuse of power by the state, and it has
Yes.
created a greater divide, a greater difference in economic power and ability between people. It has crushed the lower economic classes, and it has not harmed, it has told the professional classes, we can do this. You just go along and everything's fine. So it has really created this divide between the classes, and it's a horrible thing.
It is.
I'm really concerned about the United States.
Me too.
You guys are going very quickly into a very bad direction.
Right.
There's doesn't appear to be a unity, a national pride of wanting to do things well, And instead, there's this authoritarianism, these crazy rules that are arbitrary, this, big pharma and influential elites that are completely determining public policy. There's no discussion. There's no, the scientists toe the line. It's going in a bad place.
Right. And I think that's part of why we wanted to have this interview with you, because we want people to be able to hear out from away from just the mainstream media, from an expert such as yourself who clearly knows what you're talking about. You know the science, you know the data, and Californians need to hear that. They need to know, what's going on outside of our state, what really makes sense, what doesn't, what numbers add up, what don't. And I think, as you were talking about